Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Ara Guzelimian. I have the happy task of moderating this conversation, and I'm the artistic and executive director of the Ojai Music Festival, of which Esa-Pekka Salonen will be the music director in June. And I hardly think Esa-Pekka needs a lot of introduction since this is a real homecoming, but it's worth noting and it's worth celebrating. Esa-Pekka, I will say it loud and I will say it proud, returns to the Los Angeles Philharmonic next fall. As creative director, and in addition, we're very happily settled in the halls of the Colburn School, where Esa-Pekka heads the Nagani conducting program and where he bears the wonderful title of the Maestro Ernest H. Katz Chair of the Conducting Program. That's the chair. So it's a real pleasure for us to be reunited, and particularly with Mark Swed, another of Los Angeles's musical heroes. And in just a lovely kind of round anniversary mood that we all seem to be in with Ojai turning 80, this May, Mark will celebrate exactly 30 years as music critic of the Los Angeles Times. And if I can reminisce without aging both of us too horribly, we were both once baby music critics at the Los Angeles Herald Examiner.
Another century.
And I failed miserably, but I'm happy to say that Mark has been one of the most devoted chroniclers of musical life in Los Angeles, and someday an anthology of his writings will be really a record of musical life in this time. So welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
We will talk about a number of subjects, but there is someone very much top of mind for all three of us right now, and I'm not sure we can talk about much without first talking about Frank Gehry. Sorry. And I didn't think that would happen, but I should have expected it. We all had the good fortune of very distinctive and individual friendships with Frank, and I just wanted to take a few minutes in talking about one of our favorite subjects, which is Frank as musician. One of the loveliest moments in this sad time of losing Frank. There's a music news website called The Violin Channel, which is a very good kind of summary of various musical events around the country and around the world, actually. And a couple of weeks ago, they had, like many places do, a summary of the great musicians we lost in 2025, and it included Alfred Brendel, it included Sofia Gubaidulina, the soprano Roberta Alexander, and others, and Frank was in that list, and it touched me so deeply that he was recognized as the musician that he was. And I wonder if each of you could just talk about Frank and music for a moment, and his own relationship and his kind of profound association and satisfaction in this world of music.
Well, one of the things that was really moving about Frank is as he got older and more famous and more celebrated and more in demand, and able to build grander and grander and grander structures. His own mind, he got more and more and more just into music. And in fact, Ara and I had just talked about that, around the end, Frank had said to both of us that really all he wanted to do was build concert halls. And then it got to the point that he didn't really care about the outside so much. He cared that it looked good, but like even this Colburn hall that's being built, the original plan was a gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous glass thing that turned out to be too expensive, and he had to cut it back to just a relatively plain thing because it's just the inside that matters. And he got to the point where he had told me that all he really wanted were warehouses. He wanted warehouses in LA, he wanted one in Pacoima, he wanted one in Southgate, he wanted one here and there, that he could turn into concert halls for a couple $1 million. And everywhere he went, he wanted a warehouse that he could make into a little, like a Yola Center or something. And that music really became the center of who he was in a lot of ways, I think. It was, and he gave everything he built empowered musicians. You can talk about this for sure, but it mattered. I remember when he was building Disney, and of course you had a lot of contact with this, but he would come up to me constantly and just be so worried, is it going to sound good? Is it going to sound good? Is it going to sound good? That's what he cared about, and music really was the center. One of his closest, if not his closest friend, was Ernest Fleischman, who was the head of the LA Phil. And Frank, he complained all the time that he was not enough people wanted to build concert halls. That's what he loved, and he loved musicians, and he made musicians members of his family, really. And both Esa-Pekka and Gustavo were really members of his family. And many others whom he loved. And yes, he empowered and he made so much possible in the world of music. I can't think of anybody else. No architect in history has come close to having the effect that Frank has had on the way music is. And he didn't really believe that himself, but he cared. He just cared so deeply about it. And then he just loved going to those halls. He spent more time in Disney, I'm pretty sure, than any building that he had built other than his own home. Don't you think that's true?
Absolutely.
He was there all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. It was really his second house. And he loved being there. And he could be so grumpy, but not in Disney Hall. He could be charming in Disney Hall too, but usually he would change. He'd just go in there and there'd be a concert. And so, yeah, he represented music like, I don't know, I can't think of any other, not just architect, but artist that had the effect that Frank had. And the world of music loved him.
The ringtone on his phone was Mitsuko Uchida playing a Mozart sonata. So every time his phone rang.
Yeah. Yes, and he wanted everybody to know that. And he showed that off, and he was so proud. He just loved her. She was one of his favorites, but he bonded with many musicians. Pierre Boulez, he was very devoted to Pierre Boulez. Felt a real kinship there. Like I said, the relationship between Esa-Pekka and Gustavo goes without saying, but Daniel Barenboim, he built the Pierre Boulez Sol because he believed in what Barenboim was doing. And he bonded with a great many musicians who he truly cared about and would go anywhere to hear them. I remember on just one very funny story about Frank. I remember he went to Zurich for a concert. Lionel Brangier, when he became music director, in Tonhalle. He commissioned a piece from Esa-Pekka for that concert. So you were there, and Dudamel showed up for this because Lionel had been assistant to both Esa-Pekka and Gustavo, and Deborah Borda was there, and Frank went. He wanted to be there too. It was his anniversary. It was his wedding anniversary. So they did, for their anniversary, they flew to Zurich for this concert. And I remember being there, and it was a very fancy opening night, and full of Swiss bankers who don't give standing ovations, that's for sure. But right in the center, there was Esa-Pekka, Gustavo, and Frank. And all three of you stood up to, as a standing ovation. And especially, but Frank got up first. And all these bankers were so angry because they had to stand up too at that point when they saw you three.
Esa-Pekka, your arc, and I just was thinking about this, included, spanned the first real musical moments in Disney, memorably with Frank, and very recently a visit to the new hall that's being built, kitty corner from here. Frank is a gift who will keep on giving, and maybe you can talk about that visit, both visits in a way.
Well, first of all, I would like to say that I have seen a few concert hall projects that were not successful because of the ego of the architect. So that the architect would not lower himself to kind of listen to the acoustician and override the acoustical principles, and the results have not been so great. Frank had none of that. He said from the very beginning to Ernest and me that I want this to sound good. I want this to be a place for music, and that's all I want. And I thought, wow, that's an amazing statement from a world-renowned architect and so on. And in fact, one of the most important parts of the design of Walt Disney Concert Hall happened several years before the hall opened, and that was the design of the risers. Because Frank came to me one day and said, so how would you seat an orchestra ideally? What's the best way to seat an orchestra? I said, well, in my opinion, an orchestra sounds best when everybody's sitting pretty close together. But of course, there's this sort of human instinct to kind of make space. And especially in modern concert halls where there's plenty of footprint, so they can do that. And the cohesion and the ensemble start suffering when the distance between people grows, which is not rocket science, but it happens very often. So I said to Frank that maybe we just test this, try this out in real terms and see what happens. And so we went to the Royce Hall and spent a couple of days with the orchestra and seated them in various ways. And then I thought that we had found a perfect balance between people still being able to move their bows and stuff, but being in very close contact, like a school of fish, so that they can read off of each other this sort of mysterious seventh sense that makes like a bunch of mackerel swim in perfect formation. And great orchestras behave the same way. There's this mysterious cohesion. And I still believe, now I even have proof, but that it has to do with the physical proximity. So we taped the ideal constellation where the orchestra wasn't complaining too much. A little bit, but not too much. So I didn't feel physically threatened by my musicians. And we taped it up and then built mock risers which we put in the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. And I think it was Mark actually who noted in his review that the orchestra already sounds better with the new risers, because they sat together tighter and so on. And we had to adjust them a little bit because the double bass players kept falling off the... and nothing is scarier than an angry bass player. So we adjusted them and put some lips here and there. But as a result of this, when the orchestra moved into the Disney, they knew exactly what was what, because the risers were exactly the same as they had been used to. And it's not only that, but those riser dimensions and measurements have been used worldwide in concert halls ever since. Like when I went to the concert hall in Hamburg, the Elbphilharmonie, which was designed by Herzog, the risers were copied from Disney. And the NDR orchestra, that was the house orchestra, is the house orchestra. They had been playing for 2 weeks, but they didn't quite know how to seat themselves in that constellation. So I kind of knew. I said, you know what, guys, bassists go there, and because I was completely comfortable and at home with these risers. And you can see them now in Japan, in a few places, and so on. So Frank had this very practical, non-ego kind of approach that, okay, we have to create something that works and sounds good, because that's the function. And so the process of ideating a concert hall with Frank was very easy and a lot of fun, I must say. Because he was such a smart, quick-witted person also. But it was one of the happiest times in my life, professionally and privately, especially the last months leading to the opening festival of the hall. Deborah Borda and Frank and I, we had dinners like maybe twice a week or 3 times a week, and I think we had like more than 100 versions of the opening program. So it was just a very happy time, and I must say, every time I come back to LA, you know, this performing music is very sort of perishable. The concert is finished and that's it, and it will never come back. There might be a recording, but it's not the same. So the contrast, when I come back and I see the hall, I think, okay, it's there. It's going to be there after I'm gone, and it's going to be there forever, and at least hundreds of years. And it's something solid and concrete and lasting. And this is, it's a very, very satisfying feeling. And Frank's gift to all of us.
And he gave you the best dressing room anywhere.
The best dressing room anywhere in the world is the one that I used and Gustavo uses. And it's amazing.
But I mean, that's also Frank's care. Everything he did, he cared so much about the musicians. And I mean, I think for Disney Hall, didn't he had his original plan, he wanted a special garden and everything for the players and all these things that got cost cut out of it. But he was always thinking about the musicians, and he particularly loved building halls for students. And of course, we have the Yola Center, the New World Center that he built in Miami for Michael Tilson Thomas. Every single practice room is a little bit different. And everyone has to have a window. No more just being stuck in on a windowless thing, practicing day and night. And every room is architecturally a little bit different. Everyone is unique. And everyone had acoustics designed by Yasuhisa Toyoda. And
sorry, carry on.
Yeah.
You know, I just wanted to add that the only music library orchestral music library in the world with windows is here. Everybody else is like 20 feet underneath them.
Yeah, no, he cared
true.
about, he cared about, and he had to fight a lot of the time for these things. And he lost. When he lost some of it at Disney Hall, the things that he wanted. But it was always the musicians were the first thing on his mind. And you know, I mean, it's true, he really did he did fight with acousticians, with his acoustician, but it was always, we have to solve this problem. You know, Frank wants to do something, he can't do it, then he's going to find another way to be able to do it that it will work acoustically, like the organ pipes. That took a little doing. And there was a lot of blowback against those, right?
Oh boy.
But but look, you know,
that was a revolution.
But still, so yeah, I mean, it's...
One other detail to add, which only reinforces what Mark and Esa-Pekka are saying, the Yola Center in Inglewood, the Youth Orchestra Los Angeles, which, as Mark said, is an existing building. The exterior is an old bank building. But Frank built this beautiful facility very much along the same lines for young musicians, community musicians. And the way those very young musicians enter is through an entrance called the artist entrance. So just even that detailed of Frank's, that if you're a young, 12-year-old violinist, you're walking into this building that's meant for you through a door that says artist entrance. It's that kind of deeply, deeply humanist. And I will also add, and it's obvious in what Frank and Esa-Pekka are saying, he might be the only architect who's built a hall out of being a music lover and concert goer. So he, in a way, built halls informed by his love of what's going on stage. And as Esa-Pekka and I began planning the Ojai Festival, and this was sometime last year, when Frank was very much with us and we were seeing him, we just looked at each other and said, we have to have Frank at the festival. So on the Sunday night program, we planned, the program will open with Esa-Pekka's Fog, which is Frank O. Gary. It's Frank's initials, and it was a piece for Frank's 90th birthday, right?
Correct.
And in a lovely kind of everything comes full circle, it was written for Colburn and premiered at Colburn, initially in a version for 13 instruments. And Esa-Pekka then expanded it to a fully orchestral version of the work, which we'll hear. And maybe you can talk a little about how Fog came about and what the references are.
Wasn't it premiered on this stage?
Yeah.
On this very
right here.
stage.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. Yeah, indeed. So there was a day about maybe 2 years before the hall opened officially. So Frank called me and said, I'm depressed. I want to hear music in the hall. And I said, Frank, there's no stage yet. No, well, we'll figure it out somehow. And so I called the concertmaster of the LA Philharmonic, Martin Chalifour, and I said, Martin, can you just bring your violin and play something for us? It was still a hard hat area. So Martin was standing in front of what now is the stage, but there was just a gaping hole. And Frank and I, we were so scared and nervous because it was the first time we heard music in that space. And we had vodka on the rocks before because it was, and so on. And we sat on the topmost balcony far back. And I think holding hands, basically. And then Martin starts playing the E major prelude from the Partita for solo violin Bach. And the sound just floats around the space and beautifully, and we can hear every detail, and it's just so beautiful, and we start crying. And you know, for us, Frank and me, like the emotional opening of the hall was that moment, to hear the first notes. And then when I thought, how would I musically celebrate his 90th, so I thought I would write a piece around that Bach piece, like a fantasy on that piece, combined with the musical notes extracted out of Frank's name. So there are those two strata going on at the same time, mostly. And when I conduct that piece, or when I hear it, it takes me right back to that moment. It's one of those things.
I mentioned the word homecoming, and when we started talking about Ojai, I think I'm right that even the return to the Los Angeles Philharmonic had not yet been a glimmer on the horizon, and the idea, Esa-Pekka will be on the Saturday night of the Ojai Festival with the Los Angeles Philharmonic New Music Group, you know, which of course recognizes that association now going back, I guess, almost 35 years. Sorry about that.
I can cope.
With the Los Angeles Philharmonic, but two of the concerts will be with the Colburn Orchestra, and that's a more recent association. And you know, as I said, we didn't exactly design it with the intent to fit homecoming, but it is serving that purpose. And I wonder, you know, obviously your rich history with the Los Angeles Philharmonic has been lived through by many people here, but many may not know of this more recent chapter with Colburn. What does that represent for you?
Many things, but I got to a point in my life, happens to everybody, I think, or most of us, that you feel that you have been given so much, and I was so lucky with my teachers, wonderful people, great teachers, and I thought it's time to start giving back. And I thought I would like to create a program to help young, talented conductors to cross the bridge between being a student and being a professional conductor, which is, of course, the hardest part in a conductor's life, or anybody's life, basically, in music, also composers and instrumentalists. So, and I thought that instead of having conducting classes where somebody tells you, move your hand like this, this would be more like an apprenticeship thing. And I'm really happy to say that it's been working very well. So one of my fellows is always with me when I'm traveling and so on, and the others or the other are on campus doing all the conducting that needs to be happening in the school, which is actually a lot, and there's more and more coming because, you know, the students are more and more active in starting their ensembles and you know, extracurricular contemporary music stuff and all that. So I've been very happy about being part of such a development, and also having young, very talented people around makes me stay awake. It's because and also it makes me question my things that I've been taking for granted for decades, that I do this like this because I always done it like this. And you know, they might ask, so why do you do that? And all of a sudden I realized that I have to kind of really give an answer, which is very healthy, because it's so easy. The biggest danger for a musician composer or a performer at this point in their lives is to kind of stick into what you know. And I've always done this, and it's always been okay. And why change now? And I think the key, that's what we learned from Frank Gehry, is to always change now, no matter what point of your life you're at. So it's fun also.
And I will add, we had some planning meetings with our Colburn colleagues earlier today, and I came an hour earlier because Esa-Pekka is rehearsing with the musicians of the Colburn Orchestra for a concert this coming Saturday at Royce Hall, which I wholeheartedly encourage you to attend. And it was so touching. They were rehearsing the Bruckner Fourth Symphony. And for the Colburn Orchestra, it's not repertoire, it's new music. I would venture to say for every last member of that orchestra, it was probably their first Bruckner Fourth, right? And that's a different process.
It is. Of course it is, because again, there are no habits. And nobody's saying that we used to do it like this, and this used to be an up when Stokowski was conducting. There's none of that. And there are lots of things that are fantastic about working with young, talented musicians, but one of them is that there are no physical limitations. That, as you know, Bruckner symphonies are full of tremolos for the strings. They go like this for about 50 minutes or 60 minutes, and a seasoned professional orchestra musician is a little mindful of the elbow and the shoulder and the next week's program. So there's always some kind of a limit. But in today's rehearsal, I said to the strings that here I need a massive crescendo. And boy, did they give it. Yeah. And I thought that's so cool, because there's no worry about tomorrow. And there's time to worry about tomorrow later in life, but that's a great moment.
One of and this was more my doing than Esa-Pekka's, and I was very happy to do it. One of the connective threads throughout this next June's Ojai Festival will be a real focus on Esa-Pekka as a composer as well as a conductor, and two orchestral works, Fog, as we discussed, and a work that hasn't been heard in Los Angeles yet, Kinema, which is an extraordinarily beautiful clarinet concerto. That's from 3-4 years ago now, just during the pandemic piece, right, with the writing of it.
Basically, yeah. I actually wrote a film score during the lockdown. There's a Finnish film director who called me who said that, I understand you have nothing to do. And I said, well, that's an exaggeration, but I said, yeah, basically, you're right. And he said, now you write a film score. And so I wrote the film score, and which is an interesting experience also in the sense that about 40% of the film was sex scenes. Simulated, but sex scenes nevertheless. And I studied counterpoint, and I studied 12-tone, and I studied this and that with all kinds of teachers, but I didn't study that. And I suggested to this guy that, you know what, let's go Ingmar Bergman and do silence. When it's really intense, silence, that's really effective. And he said, no, I'm not buying that. Right. And so I wrote music for sex scenes. And then there was a lot of stuff that they ended up not using in the film, which is apparently normal, but I took it very personally, obviously. And I thought I'd actually like this stuff, a lot of it, so I should use it. And then there was a Finnish TV asked me to write something for a memorial program of a Finnish writer, film director, producer, Jörn Donner, who was actually Ingmar Bergman's producer. So I extracted a bit from the film music, and then my friend and colleague Magnus Lindberg, composer, had seen the TV program, and he called me and said, look, you just add some fast music and you have a clarinet concerto. Okay, it sounded very simple, on the phone call, but then I wrote some more stuff and then modified the film stuff, but that's why I call it kinema, because that's where it comes from.
In addition to these two orchestral works, we'll have quite a variety of smaller scale works, a string quartet called Homunculus, first complete public performance of a series of piano preludes from over the last 15 years or so, including a very beautiful memorial piece for the composer Stephen Stuckey. The US premiere of a brand new violin and cello duo that will have been premiered only the week before at the Bergen Festival in Norway this June, and we will have the first US performance in Ojai. And we're going to take a brief break for some music and to hear some music of Esa-Pekka's, performed by an extraordinarily talented current member of the Colburn community, a Colburn student. This is a solo violin piece called Lachen Verlernt from 2002,
Correct.
thereabouts. That really, in the 20 years since, has become, I know, working with many young violinists, almost repertoire for many, many young violinists. And I wonder, before we welcomed Ray on stage, if you could just say a little about this piece and how it came about.
As almost always, it's a personal thing. I'm writing for someone, and in this case, it was Julian Lin, known as Jimmy Lin, and who was then the director of the La Jolla Chamber Festival. And he called me one day and said, so can you write a solo violin piece? And I was in the middle of a big orchestral piece called Insomnia, and I said I actually don't have time to write a completely independent piece, but I could use some of the material from the orchestra piece to for the violin piece, and he said that's totally fine. So I started writing it, and I thought what I would like to achieve is a sort of a piece that, to some degree, pushes the boundaries of what you can do on a violin in the sort of traditional framework. So there's no scratching, no extended techniques, as they are called, no microintervals, nothing. It's like the framework is that of, say, Ojai or one of those composers, but within that framework, to write something which is very much my own and kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. But of course, the one thing that is very perishable, again, I use the same word, and is difficulty. Because if something is difficult or almost impossible when it's been written and premiered, it takes one generation or half a generation and it becomes normal. And this always happens, and it has always been happening during the history of music, and it happened with this piece as well. Now, as Ara said, it's been played by students, and teachers are teaching it to their students, and it's just a really most wonderful feeling to see young people tackle the piece and bring out some things in it that I didn't know were there. And that's the beauty of this deal between a composer and performer. Yeah, you write something using this symbol language, and so basically what you give to the musician is a suggestion, and then the performer fills it with their own color and expression and understanding of what it's about and so on. So I'm really very, very excited about Ray being playing my piece soon, because we played the Sibelius Violin Concerto together with the Colburn Orchestra, and he's a super talent. So,
will you join us in welcoming Ray Ushikubo? Okay, we're done. It takes your breath away, and Ray is real testimonial to the extraordinary qualities of the young musicians to be found at Colburn. And as Esa-Pekka said, you know, the 4-minute mile became a 3-minute, 50-minute second mile, and the 3.5-minute mile. And I remember some years ago, we were in a rehearsal room, and we heard a young cellist play a much earlier piece of Esa-Pekka called Ojai 3, who played it like Ray played Lachen Verlernt. And when the young man left the room, Esa-Pekka turned to me and said, "You know, that piece used to be difficult."
I'd just like to say one thing about this school. It's actually happening right now that the Colburn School has become the pipeline for the Californian orchestras to hire string players, or all kinds of musicians, actually. So one of my last hires in San Francisco were 3 musicians students from here, ex-students from here, and the LA Phil has hired at least 5. And it's really becoming, or has become, the Curtis of the West Coast. And so it's so nice to witness. And when I go around this country and also in Europe, and I bump into ex-Colburn students who are having fantastic careers here and there. So it's great to be part of that.
And at Ojai next June, there'll be 2 other extraordinary violinists, both of whom had their beginnings at the Colburn School. Lila Josefowicz will be coming to Ojai for the first time to play the Ligeti Violin Concerto for the first time. And that was, if you want to know what great program planning is, we were in a hotel room in New York visiting, and you know, we had this brilliant idea of the Ligeti Violin Concerto, and Esa-Pekka texted Lila and said, "Would you play the Ligeti Violin Concerto?" And the phone lit up immediately, and the answer was yes. And then a younger generation, fabulous violinist named Geneva Lewis will be playing the new duo with Jay Campbell, a cellist, Esa-Pekka's brand new duo for violin and cello on the opening night program, the Messiaen Quartet for the End of Time, and other quite wonderful things. Mark, you know, we're celebrating 80 years of Ojai, and I'm not going to ask you about all 80 years, but you actually have the pride of place of the longest history and most immediate memories of Ojai growing up.
Do you want to share?
What are top 2 or 3 memories?
Oh my.
What first comes to mind, not the top 2, 3.
Okay.
And
you're asking for it.
What was the earliest? What are your earliest memories of Ojai?
My earliest memories of Ojai are Krishnamurti. My earliest, when I was in high school, it was Krishnamurti we would come up to Ojai for. And then, you know, he would give these, and I don't remember if they're Saturday morning or Sunday morning talks when he was in town with this big oak tree. And you go to those, and then if it was that first weekend in June, you could go to a concert.
And
but it was
musically, what were from the festival?
The first memories?
Yeah.
I don't really remember too well what I was hearing. You know, I didn't quite know what I was hearing. We just went and sat on the lawn and just, you know, I don't know. It's too long ago. It's like the early 60s. But the first, if you want to really, if you're asking for it, but one of my first things that comes to mind, if he's sitting next to me, was a children's concert that you did at Ojai, of which I don't think there's any record.
Oops,
no photographs. Is there?
There are some memories here.
There's some memories in which you know, it was a children's concert of Toynbee Goes to the Opera. And you and Magnus Lindberg were at the piano, beginning with Einstein on the Beach, and at least one of you was wearing a bunny outfit.
We all did at some point.
There are photos.
There must have been a late night before.
It took some planning.
But I also remember that festival that just blew everybody's mind was Magnus Lindberg's Croft.
Yeah.
And, you know, we knew it from the recording as this kind of massive thing that felt like it was going to drive everybody out of the theater on a Sunday night. But it was like, what was it, 90 players, something like that? Huge.
Something like
and everything.
that.
I mean, every kind of percussion you could ever think of, and then some, and that. And it was outdoors, and it just, I don't know, the trees were vibrating. There's something incredible. It was so big and so crazy. And people
That is a happy memory, yeah.
Yeah. No, it was. But I mean, there's so many things to remember at Ojai. There's Messiaen sitting there, and the birds knowing who he was. I mean, there's often, you know, bird sound in Ojai, and it's something to be hoped for. But this was different. This was, they had a, you know, they knew who they were after. But, I don't know. One thing that I remember, I guess it was Lucas Foss, I think, year, and it was right after your mentor at the Ojai Festival,
Lawrence Morton.
Lawrence Morton had died. And Lucas got up to say something to him, and he said, it's okay, I will tell Lawrence about this, because it's a local call from Ojai to heaven.
That's a lovely story. You heard the punchline. It's a local call to heaven from
Yes.
Ojai.
Yes. Those were the days of payphones. But I mean, it's almost a blur, because there have been, I don't know, how many pieces on average in a festival? 40, 50?
Oh gosh,
So I multiply that by 60 something.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
50-ish pieces
Yeah,
usually.
I mean, I remember, you know, Boulez, that was always a huge event. Michael Tilson Thomas, I mean, I remember the sort of shock of, I believe when Michael and Ralph Grierson did the two-piano version of Rite of Spring, which is now played by everybody all the time in standard repertoire, I think that was the first time that had ever been played in public.
Yeah.
Is that true?
It is absolutely true. Mark mentioned Lawrence Morton, who was the great defining spirit of both Monday evening concerts and the Ojai Festival, and truly Stravinsky's great champion in Los Angeles. It was Lawrence who persuaded Stravinsky that the four-hand, two-pianist version of the Rite of Spring, which I think had been made by Stravinsky to accompany ballet rehearsals, would work as a concert piece. That's how persuasive Lawrence was. And the first people to play it publicly in a concert outside of a ballet rehearsal were Ralph Grierson and Michael Tilson Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
That's
and then they recorded
Ojai
it,
landmark.
and you know, these days, I don't know, there must be 50 recordings of it now.
I'll add one specific memory among many, because I go back more years than I'm willing to say publicly at the Ojai Festival. But there was a memorable night of Boulez conducting Piero Lunaire, in which perfectly on cue, as Piero Lunaire progressed, a full moon emerged above Libby Bowl. And one of the things, Esa-Pekka, that's got to be meaningful to you is so many of the composers you've championed, including Messiaen and Boulez, and others are among your predecessors. And you've spoken so wonderfully for a conductor and a composer. What does Ojai represent?
Well, it's great to be part of something with that sort of history and also a future, and something that has been always looking into what happens next. It's great to be part of that because it's a very optimistic statement in a way, that there's this very specific kind of festival that is dealing with not the most commercially successful part of our repertoire, and has been doing it successfully for 80 years, and is most likely going to be doing it for many, many years. So it's very satisfying to be part of that, in whatever way. But and of course, as we know, Ojai is a special place. There's something about it that no other place can quite offer. Can I tell my weirdest Ojai memory? Or actually,
please.
One of the happiest ones too. But we were walking somewhere in the center of town, and the Toimi ensemble, which was our like a new music lab ensemble with some friends and Magnus Lindberg and so on. The guitarist Timo Korhonen had given a recital, like a morning recital, and then we bumped into a couple, like middle-aged people, husband and wife, and the wife thanks Timo and says, "That was such a wonderful concert. I actually had an orgasm." and you know, the Finnish guys are like, okay. And I look at the husband and he says, "Yes, she did." Only in Ojai.
We can't promise, but you never know. And in the most natural evolution, we didn't consciously talk about it or design it this way, but in exactly the same spirit that Esa-Pekka described, this coming festival has real nods to cornerstone pillars of not only Ojai, but 20th century music, which are inseparable. Works of Stravinsky and Schoenberg. We like to support our local composers. And Messiaen as well, and Ligeti. But also jumping to a new and emerging generation of composers like Anna Torvaldsdottir and Gabriella Smith. So it's that span, that arc, I think, that is the most representative of what an anniversary at Ojai can be. And as I said, honoring and recognizing Esa-Pekka's life in a very focused way at the festival and as a composer.
Also remembering like friends and colleagues whom we lost too soon, like Stephen Stuckey and Kaija Saariaho and Oliver Nassen. Their music is going to be performed as an homage to these great people that should be here if there were any kind of justice in this world.
And this is an area of your background we've rarely talked about, but we will have pieces by two important teachers of Esa-Pekka, Franco Donatoni and Castiglione, and that's actually music that's fairly seldom performed in the US, and I wondered if you could just tell some people about the role they played in your emergence as a composer.
I got the two crazy ones, in a different way, both of them. But so Donatoni was this ultimate craftsman. His lessons were deadly. because all he did was to permutate a 12-tone row. Like permutation meaning you kind of change some intervals in a certain way, and then finally you have something which is completely different from the first row, and so on. And this started 9:30 in the morning. And Franco says, permutazione, and then he goes to the blackboard and starts permutating, and then there's a lunch break, like 12:30, and we went to the cantina, and when you have you know what happens when you have a big bowl of pasta, and then you come back to a warm classroom, and then your teacher is permutating for another 2 hours, and we were like, anyway, but there was something about Donatoni that I remember this day very clearly, and it was, all he said was lavorare, lavorare, sempre lavorare, just work, 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 work. And it was all about the craft, and there was he never talked about things like expression or emotion or even form. He just talked about the craft, the actual craft of writing the right notes. And his method was such that when he finished a piece, he would straight away start another piece, which is very alien to most other composers I know. But for him, it was like he was avoiding the fear of the white paper kind of thing. So he finishes a piece and starts the next one. There was a moment that Magnus Lindberg and I witnessed, and we quite often compare notes. Did this really happen? But we both share the memory, and that was one day Donatoni said, now I'm going to kill Salvatore Sciarrino, who was a slightly younger Italian composer who was teaching next door. And we were like, hey, what a joke. And then he pulls out a bread knife that he had picked up from the canteen. And he says, okay, adesso. Then he walks out with this goddamn bread knife. And all we students walk after him. We thought that this is some kind of Cajun performance situation. And then he opens the door to Sciarrino's class. And Sciarrino sees Donatoni with this knife and promptly leaves through the other door. And Donatoni was quite a sort of heavy-set guy, so he was not a big runner or anything. So he said, okay, let's go back to the classroom. And we were like, what just happened? He was also a kleptomaniac. And it was a big problem in the tiny medieval city of Siena, because the famous maestro Donatoni was stealing so much stuff, and the shopkeepers were afraid of telling him not to steal like lingerie and stuff, but because he was famous and he was a great maestro. So they complained to the mayor of Siena, who then issued a decree that Maestro Donatoni was not allowed to stay within the city walls of Siena after his lessons. So he was always escorted by the carabinieri to the hills where his house was. And, so, yeah, interesting guy. But I must say, the thing that broke my heart finally was that I commissioned a piece from him for the LA Philharmonic because we got a Kusevitsky grant. So I thought I would commission a piece by Donatoni. So I saw him in Siena, and he was like, okay, yes, of course I write it. So how many flutes you have in the band? I said, 4. Quattro flauti. And then he wrote down like the maximum size of the orchestra. And then he said, okay, I'll write it. And then the next thing I hear was that he had passed away a few months after this. And then a few months after that, there was a piece in the mail called Esa, as in my name. And that was Franco's last orchestral piece. And I then met with one of his students later on, who said that they had been sitting around his bed, hospital bed, and he couldn't hold a pen. So he had dictated this piece. And that in itself is a miracle already, but then the fact that the character of the piece is very jolly. It's like a sort of a march, and I thought, he was true to himself until the very end. And Castiglione was very different, but also very, very, very eccentric. But he was more like not a technical guy. He was trying to kind of get me out of like a serial constructivist thinking, and he pulled a fast one on me. So he gave me his overture, and he asked me to analyze the serial structure of it and present to him next week. So I went back to my digs and started analyzing, and of course I found the serial structure, and I went back to him the week after with this huge tabloid-sized papers with calculations and equations and this and that. And he looks at them and says, "Oh, interessante, veramente interessante." He said, "Esa-Pekka, you've been working a lot." I said, "Yes." And then he said, "I have to tell you that there is no such structure in this." I think that's the closest I've ever come to kill somebody. And I stormed out, but I really did learn something, because I realized that we can make a system after the fact of anything. Like Jung made horoscopes based on the tram timetables of the Vienna tram network, and they worked every bit as well as the astrological. So we learn. It hurts sometimes.
One other high point coming to Ojai, another thread of somebody who's been a part of Ojai's history, and I'm happy to say present, is we will have several works of John Adams, including the world premiere of a brand new piece for string quartet to be played by the Attacca Quartet. And I'm also happy to say somewhere in here is John, as well as Vikingur Olafsson, and John and Vikingur are central to the Los Angeles Philharmonic's concerts this week, beginning on Friday night. And this is quite a week in the musical life of Los Angeles, everything that's going on. And I'm also very happy to say that John and Vikingur's first collaboration in Southern California was at the 2021 Ojai Festival, which was the first post-pandemic Ojai Festival, and a pretty exhilarating event as we all began to emerge from our seclusion, and it was great to be in their company. There's so much else. There are many memories across the years. Mark and I were trading notes about seeing Stravinsky at various places in Southern California and Northern California, where Mark went to school as in our youngest days. I'm a proud believer in the richness of the musical history of Southern California, and it's both in the past richly with these memories, but literally ever present, including this weekend with Esa-Pekka and the Colburn Orchestra, and a new piece by a young composer at Colburn, and John and Vikingur doing recent work of John's. So we will end this gathering just by celebrating the company we get to keep in the musical life of Southern California. I invite all of you to come to Ojai in June. The dates are June 11 through 14. It's a week later than usual as the calendar falls, and hope that we shall gather there. And I want to also just close by expressing my delight at the collaboration with the Colburn School and all of my colleagues. It's already been just a hugely enjoyable and rewarding partnership. And when you see Esa-Pekka in conjunction with these young musicians, I think you're in for a huge treat. Thank you for being here. Huge thanks to Mark and to Esa-Pekka. And good night.